We've spent 2+ years for us developing our conflict resolution agreements, developing our entry and exit agreements. How do we bring in new people? What happens if people want to leave? Just all sorts of things like that. So we've put quite a bit of time into the planning and thinking. And I'm sure you've come across it before, but in case anybody's not familiar, one of the books that we learned for is called Creating a Life Together. And it's really just a rich resource for intentional communities and eco villages. The two women who wrote it spent, I think, 20+ years traveling different intentional communities, eco villages, learning from them, seeing why they succeeded, learning why some failed. And they put it all into the book, everything from how to look for property, real estate stuff, how to get to know your members, what to look for. And it's been a great resource. So that, along with just our own experience and our own kind of intuition, has been a really good guide for us as we get to know our community members. And that's basically the process we're in right now. Like I said, we're having calls with new members. We're getting to know them, seeing if they like what we're doing, if we like what they're about. And then we just are having weekly calls, getting to know them better and doing some exercises to see what are your expectations, what are your goals, where do we differ and where do we align, and are we able to work through those things. And then as that progresses, of course, we start to meet in person, we start to get people to visit the land, and then the goal is whoever feels like a good fit on both sides for us and for them will end up becoming the new members of the Conscious Agora.
Welcome to Freedom Seekers and Truth Warriors, to another episode of Age of Reinvention, where we dive deep into the hearts and minds of those who dare to challenge the status quo and illuminate the shadows of our society. I'm Emily Braun, your guide on this journey of the Age of Reinvention. And today's topic, eco-living, free cities, and intentional communities. And today, we're thrilled to have an exceptional guest, a man who has indeed walked the talk, carving out path of truth in a forest of deception. He is tireless investigative journalist, an activist, and a champion of the people's right to know, Derrick Broze. Derrick has been at the forefront of uncovering injustices, advocating for community empowerment, and inspiring countless individuals to take a stand for their freedom. From the streets of local communities in the United States to the front line of building intentional living projects in Mexico as a community of the new type, his work has not only shed light on dark corners, but has kindled fires of hope and action. So buckle up, dear listeners, as we embark on this engaging conversation, exploring Derrick's journey, insights, and the transformative power of standing united for truth and justice. A little bit about Derrick. Derrick Broze is an author, journalist, documentary filmmaker, and activist originally from Houston, US, now based in Mexico. Derrick is also the co-founder of the Freedom Cell Network, an international decentralized movement encouraging people to build local mutual aid groups to build parallel systems. Derrick is co-founder of the Great Reset Activation, which launched in January of 2021 and is known now as the People's Reset. Derrick is also founder, editor-in-chief, journalist of the Conscious Resistance Network, which is independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. His work is to create a world where corporate and state power does not rule over the lives of the free human beings. Hello, Derrick.
Thank you for having me on, Emily. I appreciate it.
Yes, I know it was a long intro, but I needed to explain to our followers and listeners who is Derrick, your first time at my studio. And I myself looking forward to understand and learn more from you. I actually followed the information about you, your videos, articles, with growing interest over the last 2 years. For a person like me, who was born in the former Soviet Union and was well educated in school and university on leftist socialistic ideas, which I later denounced and moved to the West in 1990, it's pretty curious and somewhat shocking to follow over the last couple of years the latest changes in the global media narratives, legal system adjustments towards the socialistic society structure, as far as I see and understand it, and what is significant, massive cultural changes taking place now in the West. From the different perspective, I have knowledge about agrarian reforms and agrarian type of community living in different countries and historical periods, including kolkhoz, which is actually collective farms in Soviet Union. It's a terminology and implementation of the ideas in Soviet Union, China, and other Soviet bloc countries of the past, which were complete economic and social disaster in the time. On the other side, I'm familiar about the excellent results, but actually only for two living generations, of the kibbutz movement, agrarian model in Israel, which was divided in a time into the several social movements and types. I believe that I understand the roots of your movement, and thanks to you, I read Samuel Konkin and became familiar with other anarcho-capitalistic ideas. So let's start with questions. I love your vision for the world built on mutual respect, liberty, and solidarity. If you were painting a picture of this better world, how would it look? And more interestingly for me, what steps do you think we as a people or community can start taking today to make it reality? What is your picture?
I think that's a great question. I'll preface this by saying I do believe in fighting for liberation for all people around the world. And I care what happens to my brothers and sisters in Russia or China or Africa or whatever. Of course, I care about humanity. But if we all were to focus on our own communities and our own neighborhoods, whether whatever country, state, city you live in, if each of us were to focus on that and to learn from each other and to be inspired by each other, and to take ideas from each other and then to adapt them to our own local environments and our communities and our needs and our resources, I think we would end up creating a better world. And for me, what that better world looks like, it ultimately comes down to the philosophy of voluntarism. And the key word there is voluntary. Ultimately, I believe that all humans should have the freedom to choose what way they want to live. If they want to practice capitalism or whatever you want to say, whatever ism you want to put in there, if they want to do that, and as long as they're not forcing other people to go along with that or voting to force the government to force people to go along with it, then I think that's fine. That so ultimately the world that I believe in, the better world that I believe in is a world where all relationships are voluntary and consensual, and that no individual is forced to abide by the regulations or edicts of whether that's a government or the local dictator or the local gang or whatever it may be, or even just your neighbor. I think that ultimately people need to figure out what it is that they want in their lives, what freedom really looks like to them, and then pursue that and do so in a way that doesn't coerce, defraud, or manipulate or steal from other people in order to get that goal. Now, the problem is, and you touched on this earlier when we were speaking before we were recording, is that even the idea of freedom or the word liberty, right? There's different types of liberty. Some folks might have heard the idea of negative versus positive liberty. And all that necessarily means is that some people, they think liberty or freedom means the freedom to have things like I want free education, I want free healthcare, right? And then for others of us, which is termed negative liberty, freedom means freedom from spying, freedom from invasive invasion of our homes, freedom from things, right? So we want to, for the most part, that side wants to just be left alone. Like, I want to live my life. I want to have my family, my friends. I don't want to harm anybody. And I don't want anybody spying on me, stealing from me, things of that sort. So that's one, I think, important part of the conversation is for individuals to think about, what does freedom even mean to you? What does liberty mean to you? And once you understand that, then you can look forward and decide how you get there. For me, I definitely fall more on the side of thinking that true freedom is when people have an opportunity to pursue the path that they want, but again, doing so in this way that doesn't involve force, fraud, coercion, or violence on other human beings. So even if you have a lot of people who might fall in more in the left wing category, or socialist or democratic socialist or communist or whatever they want to label themselves, they have a utopian vision of the world and everything is going to be equitable and just and this and that. But often the way they want to get there involves using government to force people to go along with it. And that to me isn't real freedom. So as far as the vision, I believe it is a world that is more voluntary, is consensual. And as far as how we get there, this is something that I do talk about in my books, which you can see near me, the Conscious Resistance Trilogy, and how to opt out of the technocratic state. But I also think we need to put energy and time into our own, what I call the internal tyrant, our own doubts, fears, insecurities, and limiting beliefs that can impact each of us in different ways, no matter what your background, your age, or where you come from. And the more we deal with those things and do that important work of trying to understand that, the more likely we are capable of actually creating new systems which do respect these values and respect people's innate power, their innate beauty, and their capability of ruling their own lives. I think whenever we fail to do that, if we fail to do that, and I think history has shown this, then what happens is that the people who believe that they are liberators and fighting for a better world, they often end up becoming the very same thing that they were fighting. And I think it's because many of these movements, particularly some of the left-wing movements, have been devoid of the spiritual aspect and have completely ignored that.
I was always fascinated by what drives people to do courageous things. Can you take us back to this pivotal moment that nudged you toward the path of investigative journalism and activism? What was it exactly that sparked that fire?
Absolutely. And thank you, Emily, for sharing your history and your background. I do think you have a lot of lived experience that's worth learning from. For me, as far as pivotal moment or what set me on this path, so I'm 39 years old right now. And 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago, I was 20 years old and I was addicted to drugs. I'd been addicted to drugs and alcohol right after getting out of high school. I was an intelligent guy. I graduated early from high school while my friends were still in senior year. I went into college and was doing all that, but I started just drinking and then using drugs. And for me, after spending a lot of my younger life really depressed, and I tried to kill myself several times, I was suicidal, just had all this mental health struggles. Whenever I started drinking and using drugs, I thought that I'd found the answer and this was the key to my new happiness. Of course, that wasn't the case. And after 2 years of bouncing between drugs and alcohol and getting evicted of apartments, living on the streets, and just really having this kind of crazy journey I went on, I ended up getting arrested. And at the age of 20 years old, right before I turned 21, I was sentenced to prison in Texas, in the United States. And that was really a waking up moment, you could say, even before I started waking up to politics and what the real nature of the world. Well before that, I grew up rebellious and not trusting authority, but not in any sort of informed, educated way. Like I couldn't tell you anything about the world. I just knew I didn't like authority. A rebellious teenager. But when I got arrested and I realized I wasn't going to go home and there was nothing I could do about it, that I was going to be stuck in this place for at least a year, I decided to really start digging in and doing sort of internal work, the healing work, and looking at my own traumas and why was I using drugs and alcohol, and digging into that. I come from a family of watching my father go in and out of prison his whole life for his drug addiction. Same thing with some of my uncles. So it was something that was very prevalent in my life. Like, I'd witnessed it and I knew right away that's not the path I wanted to be on. So I started journaling, writing down my thoughts, working on how I was feeling. I started praying a lot in prison. I started meditating. I was lucky enough to have a grandmother who was one of my biggest influences spiritually, as well as when it comes to growing food and all kinds of other things, who was sending me books about prayers, sending me books about meditation, and just being a lifeline for me. And that was the beginning of me really starting to uncover and deal with a lot of my trauma. After that was 2005, and I ended up going in and out of Texas state jails and prisons and treatment centers between 2005 and 2008. I got out for the final time in October 2008, and I was dealing with a lot to overcome. And at the same time, I was also the happiest I'd ever been in my life, because in that process of not only getting sober off the drugs, but also dealing with my trauma, it felt like this weight, this cloud had lifted off me, and I was finally able to express joy. I was also spending a lot of time at the library looking for jobs, because I said I was having trouble getting a job now that I had a felony. And in that process of letting go of the drugs and letting go of my depression, I also rediscovered my intelligence and that I'm a curious person and I like to learn and understand the world. And so that was really the beginning of me starting to question the world around me. I started by investigating the history of the drug war in America and learning the true origins of that. And I've come to believe it impacted a lot of my beliefs. I'll just say that. And that was the beginning of me starting to look around and say, if this was not what I was taught in school or a traditional education system, then what else about the world was I not taught? And that was the beginning of my activism, and then a couple of years later, my journalism and everything. But it all really started with that, with me going through some really traumatic experiences and then going to prison and deciding to turn my life around. And so next November 2025 will be 20 years since I got arrested. And I've been on this activism journalism path now for about 14 years.
So you extremely self-taught, like nobody influenced you other than books and or other than your grandma. It was all your kind of reinvention and rediscovery.
Yeah, I don't have anybody in my family who is an activist or a journalist or really is on this path. Unfortunately, my father, he never recovered from his drug addiction. He died of a drug overdose a couple years ago. I didn't have very many. Of course, my mother has always been in my life and she's done her best to be there. But I do credit my grandmothers for being a big source of both my grandmothers for being a big spiritual influence, as well as both my grandmas are very awake in their own ways, spiritually, politically, etc. When they saw that I was starting to go through my own experience, both of them were very encouraging and told me to just keep going. And in fact, it was my other grandmother, who is in her late 80s now, and she has a farm here in the United States, and she's grown up on farms. She's the other big influence for me in terms of why I'm focused on growing food, permaculture, building community. So I've been lucky enough to have some influences spiritually and in terms of true sustainability and self-sufficiency. But as far as my recovery from drugs and getting into activism, it was just, I think this is what I'm supposed to be here for.
So obviously that you faced some daunting challenges, but from all this you get to the path of unveiling the truth that many would rather keep under the covers. So could you share maybe some stories of such kind of David versus Goliath from your personal experiences? And I know that you even, it's my next question, we're trying to work with Houston communities on the local elections several times. Tell please about this period of your life.
Sure, sure. I'm originally from Houston in Texas in the United States. And as I mentioned, once I got out of prison and I started reading books and watching documentaries and paying attention to what was going on, I really quickly felt like I needed to do something. It wasn't just enough for me to read about it on the internet or to watch documentaries. And so the beginning, first thing I did was make a blog. And I was just like, okay, I'll start writing my thoughts out. And that didn't feel like enough. So I started to put up flyers around my neighborhood and put up posters around the city asking people, have you heard about this issue? Are you aware of this issue? And I think I started a Yahoo group event originally back. I don't even know if that's still a thing, but this was before Facebook or the very beginning of Facebook. And then eventually created Facebook groups. I created an activist community called the Houston Freethinkers. And for 7 years, we were very active in Houston, doing everything from protests and marches and rallies to hosting benefit shows, raising money for the homeless of Houston, raising money for anti-war veteran causes. We had a community garden that we grew lots of food and taught people how to grow their own food. I also started to through my activism, started to realize that the media wasn't doing their job. And there were some articles, for example, written about the Houston Freethinkers by the local media, and they called us a local group of conspiracy theorists. And I started to really quickly realize that the media was just as corrupt as the government and these other institutions. And I thought maybe I can do it better. So I just picked up a camera and I started going to press conferences for the local Houston police. I started going to press conferences for the mayor's office. I started attending city council and just sharing my concerns, sharing my thoughts, but also putting a camera and a microphone in the face of the politicians and the police. And that was really the beginning of me starting to take myself seriously as a journalist, and also again seeing how these politicians and the police officers and other officials, they promote themselves like they're big and they're so important. But I realized very quickly they can't handle a question that if they're not prepared for it, the illusion shatters and you can really quickly see who they are. And so over the years of doing that, going to city council probably hundreds of times at this point, confronting the mayors, confronting the police chief, it started to feel like it wasn't enough. And so, as you mentioned, I did run for mayor of Houston. I ran in 2019 and 2023. I am not a political guy in any means at all. So I don't vote, I don't promote voting, but I do encourage people, if they're going to get involved in politics, that they're better off doing it on their local level, in their cities, in their towns, in their neighborhoods, at the school boards, et cetera. I think you're more likely to have an impact there than on the presidential or prime minister level. But nevertheless, I decided that I was going to run so that I could bring these same issues in front of the whole city, because I was going to city council and I was trying to confront the city council and the mayor about, they were rolling out 5G at the time. And I was asking them questions and they were ignoring me. I was going to public events and putting a camera in front of the face of the mayor, and his bodyguards would grab me and push me, and he would laugh in my face and run away. And so it honestly started like a joke. I thought, if I run for mayor, then at least he can't run away from me. I'll be on the debate stage with him. I'll be able to reach more people. And it was actually pretty successful. I didn't become mayor of Houston, but we reached a lot of people. And the one thing about that is it's this silly little trick. By throwing my name into the ring and filling out some paper and paying a little fee to the city, all of a sudden I'm Derrick Broze, candidate for mayor of Houston, not Derrick Broze, local conspiracy theorist. So all of a sudden, I was getting invited to retirement communities, to high schools. I was getting invited to the local TV stations, to the radio stations, to be interviewed by the newspapers. I was getting invited to rich neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods, Republican groups, Democrat groups, Black neighborhoods, white neighborhoods. It opened up a lot of doors in terms of reaching new people. And that's really always my goal. I don't believe that preaching to the choir is the effective thing. I'm always trying to think of how to reach new people, especially people who aren't going to see me on Twitter or Rumble or BitChute or whatever, people who are just maybe not quote unquote awake, but who do care about their communities. And so it was an interesting effort, and I did so again in 2023. The second time, they actually removed me from the ballot because of that felony I mentioned. After I was running, I got endorsed by the local Harris County Libertarian Party. I was showing up in one of the polls showing that 7% of people wanted to vote for me. And then the mayor, the same mayor that I was saying I was confronting, him and his attorney removed me from the ballot and said that I was disqualified because of my felony, even though I ran in 2019. And so I'm actually suing the state of Texas right now because of that. And I did see Houston's a big city. It's not a small town. It's got 4 million people in the broader area. Yeah, it's massive. So a city that big, like I said, I think that we should focus locally. But maybe a city that big might be too corrupted, because there's definitely, if you don't have millions of dollars and if you don't have the connections, they will do whatever they can to ignore you and to push you out.
So probably after these events, you actually turn your attention to Mexico direction. I'm just wondering.
I was actually I ran in 2019. I moved to Mexico in March 2020, right as the whole COVID nonsense started. So I was living in Mexico when I ran for mayor of Houston the second time, but I moved back to Houston specifically to run for office. But I've been based here in Mexico since March 2020. My family's still in Houston, so I visit every couple months or so, but I'm here in Mexico right now. The land that we're building on is out here. And so most of my life is here now.
Thank you. Derrick, please explain to me how the Agorism movement and philosophy you're promoting and explaining to other people can be implemented now on the ground of 21st century, taking into account the global government coordination, mass propaganda, surveillance system, and multiple other left and right leaning social movements. In all these salads of different factors, how you think and you believe you can build the system which is really working towards the people freedom.
Oh, that's a great question. Like you said, we're dealing with a big salad, right? Of all kinds of different things. There's a lot to contend with. My ultimate belief is you come from Eastern European background, right? So you've seen how totalitarian governments can get. And that was at a time when they didn't have the technology that we have now, of course, and things are much easier for them to survey and to monitor and to spy and because of the mass propaganda that you mentioned, especially in terms of social media, it's also much easier for them to turn us against each other and to create this sort of snitching on your neighbor type community type culture. We are dealing with a lot, and I definitely don't deny that at all. My main message, maybe I should define what agorism or agorism is first. For anybody who is not familiar, I will mention as well, you can download my book, How to Opt Out the Technocratic State, at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. It's available for free. It's available for purchase in English, Spanish, German, French, and there's also an audiobook, and the Japanese version will be out next year. So if you want to pick it up and read it for free, go check it out because it talks about this stuff in depth. So the philosophy of agorism or agorism, which is based on the Greek word agora, came from Samuel Konkin III, who was a student activist in the 1960s. He's originally Canadian, and then he came to the United States. And he was also a student of history, and he was, interestingly enough, studying the Soviet Union at that time and looking at what was going on over there and noticing the rise of the black markets and the existence of this sort of underground economy, this counter economy that existed no matter how hard the state tried to clamp down. As you're likely well aware, there were people even within the government who would still go to the black market for goods and for resources and stuff. And there's other examples I talk about in my book in Peru and some other states where similar thing, they had a Marxist communist kind of revolution and it led to disaster, as you well know. And people were forced to go outside of that mainstream economy to get the goods they wanted. And so Konkin was looking at this idea, and he was very much like me, didn't believe that the answer was going to come through politics. He didn't think the answer was to be, let's overthrow the government and be violent and force our way on people. Because as I said earlier, I don't think that's real freedom. People have to choose to be free if they want. You can't force them to be free. And if you're going to not go vote, if you're not going to be violent, and if you're not just going to choose apathy and give up, then most people would say, what else is there? And there's no other option. So he started to look for another option. And how do we get to this agora, this future place where people can be free to express themselves, to trade goods and ideas and exchange cultures and all the beautiful things that we want, this voluntary coming together and these voluntary relationships of humanity? How do we get there? And as I said, he was studying various Soviet states and socialist and communist revolutions and others as well, like even the Nazis, and just trying to see what was happening, how were people responding to this. And he noticed that ultimately, no matter how authoritarian the state is and no matter how scary it is, when the state gets more and more aggressive and oppressive, people do try to find a way around. People will look for an alternative, even when it's not necessarily safe. People will still pursue, I got to eat today and I'm not getting my bread ration this week, so I'm going to go buy it on the black market or the gray market. And his idea was, what if we started to consciously put our efforts there, not just wait for the state to get more oppressive and then okay, I need to go in the counter economy, but instead put our energy into trying to create these counter economies, these parallel economies, underground economies, by focusing on black and gray markets. And Konkin, as a nonviolent person, sometimes people hear black market and they think violence of some sort. They think mobsters, criminal activity. He considered that actually red market, anything that involved violence. And so he believed that black and gray market activity, the counter economy, was all peaceful activity between human beings that the government considers to be illegal. So if the government says you need to get a permission slip or a permit to cut hair for people, the counter economist or the agorist says, I'm going to do it anyways, and I'm not going to pay the government that tax money. I'm not going to get that permission slip. I'm going to just do my business. And if somebody wants to get a haircut from me, they come to me, they pay me in whatever currency we agree upon for whatever price we agree upon. And there should be no third party in there. It's just the business of the two people interacting, not the government, not the corporations, et cetera.
So for you, it's gray market or black market? Trying to understand the difference between gray and black.
It can be both. Okay, so the difference between the gray and black market would be things that are so for example, things that are explicitly illegal, like if the government says, just as one obvious example, that like growing a cannabis plant is illegal, right? And that's breaking the law, and you want to grow cannabis for medicine or whatever reason, and you choose to do it anyway. So you're violating the government's laws. That's black market. Where gray market tends to be more things that, like the example I gave with the haircut and the permit. Technically, maybe it's not illegal, but you're supposed to be getting a permit. So I guess they would give you a ticket or something like that if you didn't have the right permit. So gray market kind of tends to more fall on that. And there's a spectrum of ideas. Again, I cover this in my book. I talk about vertical and horizontal agorism and different ideas of how to be in the counter economy. And for example, let's say that somebody wants to go to the local farmer's market and buy organic produce directly from the farmer. Now, I don't know anybody who pays taxes on those transactions. Pretty much usually it's cash. It's just, okay, yeah, that's $5 for those veggies and the eggs, and you pay that. And that person takes the money. That is a counter economic exchange right there. The government's not taking any money. Nobody else is involved in that. And so that's just peer-to-peer direct interaction. And so that's the basic idea, is that at least that's part of the agorist strategy, this counter economic idea, that if we put more of our time and our money away from paying taxes and paying permits and supporting the government financially, but also I think it goes back to our moral support and even spiritual support for these institutions. And if we focus on putting our energy into this counter economy, Konkin predicted or believed that over time, and this is like, his idea wasn't we're going to fix things tomorrow. It was definitely a generational change that he believed would take place. And I tend to agree with that. And so in his book, he describes going from what he called phase zero, which is basically like the very beginning. The idea exists, but there's not an organized movement of people doing this, because in reality, many people participate in the counter economy every day, all the time. And then he imagined that as it progresses, as the idea grows, and also, again, he was writing this idea in the 70s and the 80s, so the early 80s. I think he published the first edition in 1981. So computers existed back then, obviously, but not to the degree they are now. But he could see that technology was going to continue to evolve, and that it would play a major role both in the potential for surveillance and for tyranny, but also in the potential for helping people. So he was imagining, okay, technologies are going to come along. People will find ways to, with encryption or privacy, or some people talk about like private cryptocurrencies like Monero, or just cash, gold, barter, silver, precious metals, creating these economies outside. But also, as he imagined that as we progress through this phase and as the idea grows, and at the same time, as the government gets more oppressive, and as we notice with the Soviet Union and other places, the government gets more oppressive, people start to look for alternatives. And so his idea was like, look, if we put energy into this, we can be ahead, we can be the forward thinkers and start to create these counter economies and eventually completely parallel institutions. So being able to, for example, offer education for kids outside of the mainstream system, being able to offer food production systems and food distribution systems outside of the mainstream ones, like just going to the grocery store and things like that. And so to me, I've taken his ideas and adapted them a little bit more for the 21st century. And I believe that we're still early in this phase of these beliefs spreading. But I think, back to what I said earlier, that if more and more of us focus our energy on what we can do on the local level, we will continue to see the creation of these parallel economies and these parallel institutions. That doesn't mean that we should expect that we're just going to be left alone and they're going to let us be peaceful off on our own. That's one of the criticisms I often hear from people, to say, oh, so you think they're just going to let you grow your own food? You think you're just going to let you build a community? They're going to come kill you guys? Or Klaus Schwab said, you'll own nothing and be happy, so they're not going to let you. And those are all very real possibilities. But my response to that typically is, so should I do nothing? Should I just sit around and not even bother trying? Because the way I see it is, I'm living this path. This isn't just something I'm writing about. We got land. We have our core group of people. We're bringing in new people. We're already growing fruit trees out there. We've got water springs, and we're building our homes. And we want to be an example for other people. We also want our land to be a place where we can bring people there for retreats and workshops to teach them more about these ideas. But I have no illusions to think that we're just going to be able to be left alone for the rest of our lives. But the way I see it is, if we progress and then one day some bad people, whether it's just common criminals or government or World Economic Forum or whatever, comes to try to stop us, and if I unfortunately lose my life in that process, at least I'll be able to say that I lived my life in line with my values, and that I was eating organic food and drinking clean water and helping other people see that this is potential, that this is possible. And the reality as well is that I'm not doing this alone. I mean, there are so many people who have been not only inspired by my work, but also have been getting a similar message and realizing, like, you know what? The cities are where they're building smart cities. The cities are going to get even more difficult to remain free in the coming years. And I'd rather live a little bit outside the city, or maybe in a smaller town, or some people, of course, moving from California to Texas or to Florida, or people coming from Europe to Mexico during COVID, whenever things were really bad. People are making real moves and thinking about what's the best for their future, and not waiting for government to save us. And I think that's ultimately my key message. I'm not here to say that my path is the one path and that's the only answer. I think that would be silly. But I do believe that people should at least think about what's coming and prepare for that, not live in fear, not live in like everything's screwed and there's no hope, because I don't believe that as well. But we would be silly to not see what's on the horizon, and at least to take steps to make sure that if those things do come and we're not able to prevent them, if digital identities come and social credit scores and mass surveillance to a level we've never seen it, and facial recognition scanning, all these things that are in development, central bank digital currencies, that making sure you're not dependent on those systems is probably the key. That's at least what I believe is the key. Because if you sit and do nothing, or if you sit around and wait for politicians, then when those systems roll out, you're going to be dependent on them. And that's what a lot of people had to do. But there were others who did take it seriously and who completely changed their life, their habits, their path, in order to reorient it to make it more conducive to actual liberty. And I think that's the key, is just each of us need to decide what systems do we need to do we want to interact with as we move forward. And that's going to be different person to person. For me, for example, one example, as they roll out facial recognition everywhere in the airports, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to avoid it right now. For example, in the United States, you can still say no, you can opt out of it, but that will change. And there's discussions about that being mandatory by 2026 or 2028. And for me, that'll be the end of me flying commercially. Like, I'm not going to comply with that. I'm not going to participate and just make excuses, because I think we need to have red lines. We need to know what we won't put up with and be aware of that, while we focus our energy on what we actually do want.
Whoa, I would say. And I support a lot of your ideas. And with all my kind of personal experience, knowledge, the wake up call for me personally was again when lockdown happened, specifically in Canada. How can these ideas that you mentioned, your vision, can be implemented in Mexico in the 21st century? And it's not secret that I'm planning my relocation to Mexico, and it's happened during the COVID. My clear understanding that I need to be prepared, and it's not my just backup plan, but the vision for the better future for me. And by the way, why Mexico? I have these answers for me, but I'm interested in you. And why Michoacan, or this state that, according to Department of State Travel Advisory, as we both know, not the safest country state, I would say, in Mexico. And I can tell you that I traveled in many Mexican states already myself. I'm traveling alone, taking, buses, planes, and my Mexican friends actually didn't suggest me to go to Michoacan. It was one of the reasons I didn't visit yet your property, which is on my plan now. So let's go to Mexico.
Sure. Why Mexico? I'll start there. I'm from Texas, so we're close to Mexico. I I visited Mexico a few times when I was younger, mainly just crossing the border. But really, what started it for me was in 2017. So my current partner, her name's Miriam, she's firstborn generation in the United States. Her parents are both from Mexico. And her and I got together at 2016, and then we visited Mexico together in 2017. I was actually getting invited to speak down in Mexico, and she hadn't been in Mexico since she was a little girl. So I said, "You want to come with me? We'll travel around, we'll visit, we'll go see your grandparents and things like that." And honestly, we just fell in love with the country. For her, it was reconnecting to her roots. My family is indigenous to Texas on my mom's side. And as I mentioned to you, my father's side is from Eastern Europe. But so for me, I'm not Mexican. I'm native to Texas. But for her, it was very much, I feel like I'm coming home, reconnecting to roots, that sort of thing. And we really started to enjoy it. And so that became an annual trip for us. Every January, February, we would spend about a month, like you said, taking buses, flying around Mexico, visiting different parts. And after a couple of years of that, we knew like at some point in the future, we want to move to Mexico. We want to start a home out here. And it was even before the idea of my community project, the Conscious Agora, the eco village that we're building. It was just, we knew that we would like to be in Mexico for different reasons. And so 2020 came around, and in January and February, we did our annual trip to Mexico. And I remember telling her while we were in Mexico in January, there's something weird happening in China. I'm hearing about something, COVID, something or other. And I don't even think they'd given it that name. They were just talking about coronavirus. But we went back to Houston, came back to the United States after our trip to Mexico. And when we got back, the toilet paper was running out of the grocery stores. Everything was starting to be crazy. And I remember that day, Trump was talking about potentially, they were talking about closing the borders down. The way I've always felt is if the government starts talking about restricting interstate travel, even in Texas, and Texas is the size of some countries, so it's not like it's a small, there's a lot to get around, but still, to me, that's the cage. I don't care if the cage is the size of Texas. I don't want to be trapped. So the moment we heard that, we literally loaded up our car and we started driving to Mexico. And we basically just decided, let's go visit your grandpa and just watch this from a distance because it felt like things might be a little more relaxed. And for us, it was the right move as Mexico became the only country that never had quarantines or lockdowns or shots. It was decentralized. So some states were a little more pushy about things than others. But generally speaking, you didn't have vaccine requirements. You didn't have any of that stuff. And one of the beauties that I believe in, and this kind of goes into the whole agorist counter-economic message of how do we do this? Some of the states in Central and Latin America, Mexico included, are a little bit behind in some forms of technology. Now, big cities like Monterrey, Mexico City, it's like any Western nation. You got everything you could want and need in terms of city stuff. But the infrastructure for the government is still very weak. And I think that's to the benefit of the people. So, for example, I heard a rumor that during COVID, a lot of people were using fake PCR tests to travel, and they were able to easily forge those documents using online editing programs.
It was whole industry in Mexico for people who wish to get it. This exactly black market.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. And part of that was as well, we were part of that. We were helping people we had fake PCR tests from Nicaragua, from Guatemala, from Mexico, and helping people travel. And we had friends and family who were like, I've got to go back to Canada and they won't let me with this. Miriam and I did. We were actually helping bring people down from Mexico as well during COVID. So we called it the Modern Underground Railroad. I talk about this in my book as well. And we would meet people in Houston, and then we would just we had a caravan of 5, 6, 7 cars sometimes, and we would just drive them to the border. Again, nothing illegal, but just for people who never crossed the border and wanted to do it together, especially during COVID, everything was all crazy. And we probably did that 10 or 12 times, just back and forth, making these trips, helping people. And some of those people are still here. They live in Mexico. Some of them stayed for a while and then maybe went back to Canada or wherever they were from, because I'm sure a lot of Canadians came to Mexico during the COVID years. And yeah, that was part of the journey. But in 2020, when we came back for that, and once we decided, we were here for a couple of months watching, and then we just decided, okay, look, we said we were going to move to Mexico. Let's just do it now. Let's go back. Let's get our stuff and start moving here. And as far as why Michoacan in Morelia, where I'm at specifically, I'd never been here, but Miriam's family is from San Miguel de Ande, which is 2 hours away from us. And like I said, we went to go see her grandpa. And at the same time, the Freedom Cell movement, which you mentioned earlier that I'm a part of, was really starting to get a lot of interest because people were looking for solutions. And so I created the Mexico Freedom Cell in March 2020 online on Telegram. And immediately people from all over started joining, saying, "Hey, I'm in this part of Mexico. How's it over there? I'm over here. What's going on?" And it was just a way for us to communicate about what's going on. And we didn't know where to go, but a gentleman popped in there and said, "Hey, I live in Morelia. If anybody needs a place to go, it's come here. You can be safe." And this person ended up becoming a really good friend of mine. His mother is also a real estate agent. So she ended up being the one that helped us find the property. Just a lot of different synchronicities, if you will, things that I felt like were pulling us here. So we came to Morelia and we just got an apartment originally. And then we just started our search. We've looked at property in the Yucatan, over in the near Jalisco on that side, further down near the coast. And the property that we ended up getting just kept calling us back because it's got fruit trees with already got avocados and bananas and pears and limes and all this stuff. And it's got water and so many different things. We just ended up settling on this. And you're correct. The US government claims that this is one of the most dangerous parts in Mexico. And they're not 100% incorrect, but as usual, there is absolutely government propaganda along with that. As you can mention Mexico to people, and people will assume that people are being beheaded on the street everywhere you go, and it's just violence on every corner. And in many cities, and I would say a lot of cities in Mexico, are actually safer than some of the most dangerous places in the United States. And I feel that way about Morelia. I can walk out right now and I can see parents taking their kids to school and people walking their dog, and we go to the gym. My life isn't in any danger on a daily basis. I'm just fine. But that doesn't mean that those things don't exist in Mexico. But and it's funny you mentioned it to your Mexican friends, because same thing, even some of our Mexican friends are like, "Whoa, you live in Michoacan? That's pretty wild out there." I'm like, it's actually not that wild. And the other reason though that I love this area, which again, I never had been out here before. The interesting thing is I'd actually written articles about Michoacan years ago in my journalism, talking about the auto defensas and how different communities were rising up and pushing back against the cartels and pushing back against the corrupted government. So that's another big inspiration for us. But the other thing is that this is where the vast majority of the farms are as well. This is, beautiful region. Not only it's the Ruta de la Mezcal, so there's mezcal out here, agave being grown everywhere, avocado state as well. Yep. And there's so many farms. So we have access to, like I was talking about, farmers markets. There's so many people growing all kinds of food here. And where the United States has pretty much outsourced most of their farming, except for California and then some GMO crops in the Midwest, Mexico is very rich, especially in this area, in terms of food production and food wealth. And that is important, I think, having that food security. And then in addition to that, the more time we spend here, we've just got to connect with other people who are similarly minded, Mexicans who are focused on organic food, who have local seed banks, and who are naturally living in the counter economy, because a lot of Latin America, including Mexico, uses cash on a regular basis. Many people don't pay taxes just because that's just what they do. They're not agorists or anarchists necessarily, but they're already doing it. And so again, that goes back to how Konkin thought. But if we can help people understand that there's actually strength and power in that, then we can come together and build this alternative. And that means if and when the government's currency collapses, whether it's pesos or dollars or euros or whatever, we can be in a position at least where we won't be as impacted, because we won't be dependent on those systems. So yeah, this is where we came, and we got our land last May 2023. And we have a small group of 4 households right now, which are our founding family is what we call it. And actually, literally right now, we are vetting new members. So this evening, actually, as we're recording it, we have a call with 2 potential new members, and we have about 6 or 7 people who are in our process of getting to know each other, and then they'll come visit the land soon and decide if we're a good fit for each other.
So it's exactly my next question. So your Conscious Agora Ecovillage, I think it's official name, yes? In Mexico, seeking for the new community members. Please tell us about the actual project of the progress of this project, and what kind of people would be the ideal match for this community spirit and rules. I believe there are rules anyway.
Sure. Just like with anything, we have our vision of what we want to build. First of all, people can check out the website, theconsciousagora.com, and that'll give you a little brief background on it. And if you are interested, people can contact us through the website and let us know that you're interested. We are still, as I said, looking for new potential applicants. But I originally wrote about this idea in my 2017 book called Manifesto of the Free Humans, which is from the Conscious Resistance trilogy. It's the third book in there. And the idea was a community that was founded on three basic principles or values. The first one being what I called at the time sovereignty of the individual, which is just basically self ownership, individual liberty. That is the key component. As I said earlier, some people have visions of communities and they're more collective or communal, like we're going to share resources, we're going to pool all our money. That's not what we're going for at all. We are all very strong, proud individuals who also value privacy as well as the benefits of community. So we're very much trying to balance those things. Those who you're going to have your own home, you have your own acreage on the property, and that's yours, and nobody can tell you what to do in that space. And at the same time, we all get to enjoy the benefits of the fruit trees that are all on the land and the water and being able to swim in the water and drink the clean water and things like that. So we're really trying to balance those aspects out. But individual liberty is really the cornerstone, the key component. Another essential component is permaculture principles. And very briefly, permaculture is it's more of a design philosophy than anything, but it's mostly associated with how we grow our food. And it's really about the way that we interact with the planet, the way we grow our food, the way we build our buildings, the design, how you outline a community. And it was discovered or outlined in the 70s, but it's really based on a lot of indigenous principles of growing. And in Mexico, those principles are still very alive, like different things like milpas and stuff. People are still growing their food in the same way they have for thousands of years in some cases. And so permaculture is about that. And ultimately, to me, we're just trying to say that we don't want to we want to take this property and we want to add to it. We want to bring more to it. We want to bring in more fruit trees. We don't want to let's tear everything down just to build our homes and then recreate the same things that we've seen in the suburbs or elsewhere where people end up very separated from nature. And instead, we want to be integrated with that. We want to be integrated with the wildlife and with the food and et cetera. So Miriam and I got a permaculture certification in 2020 as well. And that's another central aspect. That also includes ideas like natural building. Of course, the long-term goal is to be off-grid, to use solar and water containment and collection so that we don't have to depend on the main electric grid and things of that sort. And then the third component is what we just call generally mindfulness. And so this doesn't mean everybody has to pray every day or we must meditate 1 hour per day or anything like that. It's just generally saying that we want to work with other human beings who do have an interest in continuing to grow and evolve as individuals, and who ideas like nonviolent communication, ideas like being able to have a true dialogue and communicate with each other, good and negative. It doesn't mean we act like everything's peaceful all the time and we suppress our anger, our frustration, or anything like that, which I think is a big flaw in some of the spiritual community. But it means having a space to be real and to be authentic with each other and not being static and stuck and things like that. And so those are the sort of three core things. And then there's a few other kind of values that we also get into, but that was the original foundation of it. And as I mentioned, I started writing about this in my book in 2017. At that time, I was still in Texas. So I was originally planning to do this in Texas. And in the book, I wrote, I'm going to start building this in 2020. And sure enough, COVID came around. And it was like, all right, God is pushing us in that direction. Like it's time to do it. And then in September 2020 is when Miriam and I really opened it up and did this call and said, hey, if you're interested, reach out to us. And we had hundreds of people from around the world reach out. We narrowed that down to 50 people. And then we spent 2 years getting to know those people. And when we bought the land last year, it ended up being our five households together that were the founding family. So we're looking for more people now. We're expecting the land is 22 acres, so it could definitely handle quite a bit of people, but we're taking it in phases, step by step. And we're hoping at this point to have a total of 8 to 10 people, which is really around the number that we talk about in Freedom Cells, keeping it smaller where we can know each other, but also where there's enough people to really have a sense of community. And we also don't have any kind of age limit. So we're not just looking for young people. In fact, I'd say about half the community is people who are 50 and older and people who are coming in who are interested. The main thing more important than anything, I would say, is an understanding of those values and those principles and an ultimate belief in a similar vision. We're all going to put it in our own words when you say, what does your community look like? And that's fine. We just want people who are really understanding like our goals with mindfulness, with permaculture, natural building, and with respecting individual liberty. because there's a lot of intentional communities and eco villages out there, but some of them were they were about you had to get a vaccine to show up and visit during COVID, or you had to wear a mask and things like that. So people shouldn't assume that all eco villages are awake or whatever, that they get it. They might understand the importance of growing food and community, but they might not totally understand the importance of respecting your individual liberty, your bodily autonomy, and things like that. So for us, it felt important to make sure that was a core component of that. And so people who understand the vision, we are, of course, looking for people who do have financial resources, because you got to be able to build your home and do things like that. And people who have skills to offer, whether that's mechanical skills, building skills. There's all kinds of different things people have to offer. And I can say have been so blessed to work with all kinds of people, even the people who decided that our community wasn't the best fit for them, or that they ended up not wanting to come to Mexico. We've met so many talented people, and we wish them all well. Ultimately, we want people to find whatever community, eco village, or whatever it is that you're looking for.
It's one of the reasons I launched this channel, just to get people familiar with different leaders like you and the different community types, to, first of all, to understand the difference, actually, requirements. By the way, how far away you are from Morelia, from the city or whatever close city? Because you need to be connected with kind of infrastructure, even you are independent.
We're about an hour and a half outside of the city in the mountains. So yeah, which is, for us, it's just about right. It's interesting because everybody, again, has their own vision. We've talked to some people who are like, oh, that's a little too far out of the city for me. Other people are like, oh, that's too close. I don't want to be that close near a city. So again, everybody's going to have their own vision. But for us, it works for our vision. And for me personally, I'm in my house right now in Morelia. So we have a house in the city that we plan to keep. We're going to always probably keep a place in the city because I love this city and what it has to offer. But I also don't want to be dependent and expect that it will always be safe necessarily. So the land is outside the city about an hour and a half, and there is electricity out there. There's water, all that stuff. So as we're starting, we can still be quote unquote on the grid until we're ready to say we don't need to do that anymore. And I think that's really what's important for us, is having that vision of knowing where we're at and knowing where we're trying to get. And that, of course, as you're trying to build a community and you're trying to bring in new people, people have these questions, people have these curiosities. What's the plan for this? How are we going to work on this? And we spent a lot of time. We've spent 2+ years for us developing our conflict resolution agreements, developing our entry and exit agreements. How do we bring in new people? What happens if people want to leave? Just all sorts of things like that. So we've put quite a bit of time into the planning and thinking. And I'm sure you've come across it before, but in case anybody's not familiar, one of the books that we learned for is called Creating a Life Together. And it's really just a rich resource for intentional communities and eco villages. The two women who wrote it spent, I think, 20+ years traveling different intentional communities, eco villages, learning from them, seeing why they succeeded, learning why some failed. And they put it all into the book, everything from how to look for property, real estate stuff, how to get to know your members, what to look for. And it's been a great resource. So that, along with just our own experience and our own kind of intuition, has been a really good guide for us as we get to know our community members. And that's basically the process we're in right now. Like I said, we're having calls with new members. We're getting to know them, seeing if they like what we're doing, if we like what they're about. And then we just are having weekly calls, getting to know them better and doing some exercises to see what are your expectations, what are your goals, where do we differ and where do we align? And are we able to work through those things? And then as that progresses, of course, we start to meet in person. We start to get people to visit the land. And then the goal is whoever feels like a good fit on both sides, for us and for them, will end up becoming the new members of the Conscious Agora.
Your community is on my list to visit. Now I will not listen to my Mexican friends. I will come to Michoacan.
You should definitely come. You should definitely come visit, not only for our land, but this is also where we do the People's Reset as well in Morelia. So we're doing the next People's Reset at the end of January. So if you're in Mexico in January and you want to come visit, it's a great time because there's hundreds of people from all over the world. So it's a good place to network and meet other people who are looking for communities. And we also like to highlight different communities existing in Mexico and elsewhere. And yeah, it's just a good time to come out, and we'll be working on the land.
Thank you very much, Derrick. I don't want to take more of your time because I know I understand how busy you are. It was very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to learning more from you.
Thank you. What a profoundly moving and enlightening conversation with Derrick Broze. Not every day we hear such raw and powerful insights from a true warrior in the battle of freedom and transparency. We are deeply grateful for your courage, your wisdom, and your unyielding spirit. Thank you for sharing your journey with us, and I wish you the all success possible. To our dedicated listeners, we hope today's episode has ignited something within you. A spark to see your truth, stand up for what is right, and contribute to the world uniquely. Remember, each of us holds the power to affect meaningful change, starting in our communities and resonating out into the world. If today's conversation has inspired you, we encourage you to dive deeper, learn more, and start your journey of awareness. And remember to support Derrick's continuing work. We can build a future founded on truth, justice, and freedom. Thank you for tuning in to the Age of Reinvention, Eco-Living, Free Cities, and Intentional Communities. Be sure to join us next time as we share stories that inspire, challenge, and connect us all. Until then, stand tall, seek the truth, and be the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you.